who Charles Handy is. You say Charles Handy and then your explanation there in his book, The Empty Raincoat. Or if you say Ta-Nehisi Coates, comma, former writer for the Atlantic, comma, and then go on. So again, this is going to be one that you're going to use a lot in academic writing.
Yeah, and we talk about this too when we do our writing with style, like variety in your, we do a workshop on that, writing variety. So when you break up your sentences and combine sentences like that with the positives, and we'll practice these again. So commas with non-essential clauses, right? There is, however, one mistake that many students make. Just like with the appositive, you don't need that, however. If you took it out of the sentence, the sentence would be able to stand on its own. So you need to offset it with 2 commas. It's a break and kind of an interrupter in your sentence.
Stop, the floor is slippery. So an interjection is something that is not, it's not a classical sentence, but people use it as a sentence, like wow, or geez, okay? An interjection, stop, the floor is slippery. So you want to use, you can use a comma after an interjection.
And then commas in a series of 3 or more. If you are listing 3 or more items, it was a warm comma, dry comma, and sunny day in my town. So that comma before the end, if you are listing in academic writing, and that I think gets confusing too, because a lot of times in popular things like magazines, newspapers, things like that, you may not see that comma before the end, but with MLA and APA, include the comma when you're listing 3 or more.
That's a special kind of comma called an Oxford comma. And there's a pop song called Oxford comma. It's my favorite.
No problem.
What? Hello? Oh,
sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, last one that we're gonna go over right here, commas with a date, okay? On July 4, comma, 1776, comma, our founding fathers. So that's to offset the year. So you're gonna put the year in commas. However, notice that there is no comma on the second example. Your homework is due on November 7th at noon.
Yes, so if you don't have, if it's with that TH or second, right, ND, then you don't need the comma after it, okay?
Does anyone have any questions about these comma rules?
Okay. I think a lot of times, I think commas are something that a lot of people, when they're writing, they make mistakes frequently with commas. And the thing that's difficult in writing classes for me is that everybody makes different mistakes, right? So to do an entire lesson on just one mistake is really, it may not be useful to everyone in the class. But once you know the rules, I think it becomes much easier. Okay, so I am going to put this in the chat, give you the link. Give me 1 second. Let me share it. Okay, so I've given you the link to a Jamboard. Have you all worked with a Jamboard before? Do you know how to do it? Just log into that. It's a Google document, basically. That's all it is. You can log into the link and I don't know, do you want to go, Ashley, should we do the breakout rooms? Go into breakout rooms and try and do it, or just work on it? What do you think?
I'm not sure.
I don't know how much time we have. So if you just take a few minutes and look at this sentence and see if you could figure out where the commas go. We'll take like 2 or 3 minutes. So where would you put the commas in this sentence? If you want to put them on the Jamboard, you can feel free to go in and edit it and add them in. If you want to copy it and put it on another document and play with it, go for it. You can cut and paste it too.
I see someone drawing in the commas and doing it correctly with the year.
Yeah, you can draw them, or you can hit those little dots when you click on it, and it lets you edit it too.
I think people are figuring out how to do it.
Take a minute. I went on another slide and have all the answers in there so we could quickly go back and look, but you can keep the Jamboard up if you want to look at it and see what you had and see if it matches what you thought should be. What are you guys doing to my Jamboard? It's like all over the place. I like using this in class because students they play around it and they kind of, get really funky with it and do their own thing. I'm going to let you work on that, and I'm going back to the PowerPoint.
It's kind of difficult to use that with so
It
many
is.
people into one document.
So I'm going to put it here, and you can look at it on the screen here for a minute and see if that makes it a little bit easier. Where would you put those commas?
The first would be after 20, July 20, comma.
Okay. Anybody else? Where else? Where would the next comma go?
The next one would be after 1969.
After 69, yep. On July 20th, comma, 1969, comma, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon.
Comma.
Yes, compound sentence. And he uttered the famous words, one
Comma.
small step for man. Yep, afterwards. Good. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
For man,
After
man.
man, there will be a comma.
Yes, good. Okay. Although it had been hoped that the moon landing would lead to significant advances in space travel,
Comma.
Comma.
where would the next comma go?
Just where you
After
said travel.
Somebody said it, I think. Somebody said, where would the next one go?
After travel.
Mhm.
There's another one missing in there.
Although
put
it
it-
had been hoped, comma, that the moon landing would lead to significant advances in space travel, comma.
So you have an introductory phrase there. I mean, an introductory word, actually.
Oh, after all though.
So, okay. So here's where you would have put your commas, just so you guys could see. So, although it had been hoped that the moon landing would lead to significant advances in space travel, comma. So you did say that.
Yeah,
Right. Some of which may soon become a reality.
comma.
Yep. Why is there a comma there?
Because it can do without it being there. So you could go from advances in space travel, the scientific progress. So it's standing on its own. It's just like something that connects them together, I guess.
It's a positive, right? It's just
Yeah.
an interrupter. It gives more
Yeah.
information. That's it, but we don't necessarily need it.
Right.
So what about the next sentence? Where would the next comma be? After however, right? That introductory word.
Right.
And then the Oxford comma after space station, shuttle, right? List
Mhm.
3 things in a row. So you would have that Oxford comma there. A lot of times, like I said, I would see the Oxford comma would be missing. The appositive, I typically see people, students will make mistakes in their writing. But these are pretty, once you know the rules, I think this becomes a lot easier. So, okay. So with those rules, really, I mean, it's important to understand the clauses, because if you know what the clauses are in your sentences, it's going to make it a lot easier when you're trying to decide, do I need a comma there or do I not? And Ashley and I have many a time gone back and forth over, does that need a comma, does it not, right? So a clause is a building block of a sentence with each one adding to the overall detail of a sentence. So it's a group of words that may or may not have complete meaning on their own. So I think in the sentence that Ashley had given you before, she said, after the death of his wife, right? In the example that she gave you for the introductory element, that's a clause, it's a dependent clause. So what a clause basically does is it creates a fragment, right? So an incomplete thought. So you have sentence fragments when your sentence is missing a subject or it's missing a verb. But the third type of fragment, which is a dependent clause, is an incomplete thought. So in that sentence, after the death of his wife, comma, party went into a deep depression, you need that dependent clause attached to that, because after the death of his wife, what? He moved, sold her stuff, married somebody else? We don't know, right? So that's an incomplete thought. A sentence may contain more than one clause, but must have one main clause. Okay, so we'll look, I'm pretty sure we go into sentence types, but if you have a compound sentence like we just looked at, right? You have two independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction. But when you have a dependent clause attached to an independent clause, you create a complex sentence. When you have more than one dependent clause attached to an independent clause, or more than two independent clauses with a dependent clause, you create a complex compound sentence. So it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and more complicated. Okay. Great. You want to do this one, Ashley?
I'll try. Okay.
If you want, I'll do it. I don't mind.
No, I just hope I don't mess up. Okay, so main clauses, okay? In English, a main clause has to have a subject and then a verb phrase. So for example, I ran, okay? I ran is a complete sentence, okay? There are lots of, that's obviously one of the most simple sentences, and everything else gets kind of tacked on to the subject and the verb. So you don't necessarily have to have anything after that, but it does, of course, spice up your writing, okay? So coordinated clauses. A sentence may consist of two main clauses that make sense on their own, linked by a conjunction. They call that a compound sentence. So I ran and I stopped. That's two different clauses, because it could be I ran, I stopped. Dependent clauses cannot stand on their own, okay? So I ran so far away. So far away doesn't have a subject or a verb. So far away is a dependent clause. It has to be tacked on to I ran. I've been listening to music. I ran so far away. Anybody know that song? Anyway, so clauses are sometimes separated by commas, but not always. And as Teresa has down here, a clause that is not a main clause does not have to have a verb or a subject, like so far away. There's no subject there, there's no verb. So here we have in red two dependent clauses, due to high winds. So that's a dependent clause and it's set off by a comma. It's like an introductory phrase. It's giving additional information to the main clause, the boat returned to shore. The boat returned to shore due to high winds. You see how in the second one, there's no comma? So keep in mind that introductory phrase rule. Like where you have the author said, it's like an introductory phrase. That's a good one. But go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I always like to tell my students that when you're not sure, right? That's the nice thing about English, is that you can move things around and say what you want to say and do it in the way that you're sure is grammatically correct, right? So due to high winds, there is no verb in there too, right? So that's one of those clauses that doesn't have a verb. When it's at the beginning, you kind of have to tack it on there with your comma. But if you move it to the end, you can flip it, you don't need the comma there. All right, so always go with the way that that you're certain is correct too. And the other thing with writing is that If I was going to write, there were high winds, the boat returned to shore. This, when you combine and make these complex sentences, it improves your writing. And when you vary your sentences from compound sentences to complex sentences, and you have a variety, it also gives a little bit of rhythm and, it doesn't make your writing become monotonous. So that's another reason that we use these different kind of sentences.
So yeah, this is another way to make your academic writing specifically more complex.
And to, if somebody ever says to you that your writing is a little wordy, right? Or if you're writing for something where you have a word limit, like there are a lot of times we do proposals and things like that, where we only have a 300 word limit or something. This is a great way to cut words out, start combining your sentences. Okay, so these are just some examples of those main clauses and coordinating clauses and dependent clauses. So Laura loves to visit the circus. Independent sentence, has a subject, has a verb. Tigers are Laura's favorite, but her father prefers the elephants. Two independent clauses, but they are related. The sentence is a compound sentence, but both of those independent clauses are related. And then while Laura was watching the tigers, her little brother ate her cotton candy. I can flip that and say her little brother ate her cotton candy while Laura was watching the tigers. Do I need the comma anymore if I flip it? Nope. Good. Okay. So I am not going to send you to another board because I don't want you to get confused. I think it's a little bit easier to work this way. At the top of the screen, you can see are the coordinating conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. These are fanboys. I call them the party animals of the English language, right? They join things, they bring people together. One thing I want to remind you too with the fanboys is they are meant to join sentences. Do not start sentences with them. Right? So a lot of times I see students will start with so, right? And in academic writing, you don't want to do that. They're used to create compound sentences. All right. And then subordinating conjunctions. These also, another thing to keep in mind is that when you start your sentence with one of these subordinating conjunctions, be careful, because that's how a lot of times we fall into the trap of creating or writing a fragment, a sentence fragment, right? So after whatever, they usually will create a dependent clause when you begin a sentence with them. All right. So in the paragraph, the circus came to town. Take that paragraph and see how many sentences you can reduce that to. Okay, how many of those sentences can you join together? How would you rewrite that? And then let's see how many, we'll count up, tell me how many sentences you got. Put it into the chat. I'm counting up mine. I didn't know how many I got. If anyone has a question, just feel free to ask.
This is a good activity. People are working hard.
There's 12 sentences there. I want to see how many you can get it down to. Tighten up your writing. We'll give like 3 minutes, 3 more minutes to kind of work on it. When you're finished, just put in the chat how many sentences you were able to get it down to.
Or you could take your new paragraph and post it into the chat.
Oh, yeah. I'll do that. Anybody finished? Is it difficult to do?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Hassan.
But can we move like the sentences?
Yep,
Hello?
go ahead.
Okay.
As long as it makes sense. Give it another minute. Okay, anybody finish? Anybody get a full paragraph out of those? There's 12 sentences. Anyone want to tell us how many sentences they have so far? If you were able to get it down or share what you did? Even if you didn't get through the whole thing.
What was your strategy for combining the sentences? Did you use conjunctions?
Anybody want to take a shot at it?
5 sentences for me.
You have 5 sentences?
Yep.
That's what I got. Good. Do you want to read it? What did you get?
Yeah. So actually, I did on my own. I didn't write anything. So let me tell you. I decided to go to the circus. That was inexpensive. Then I didn't think that the clowns. I didn't think the clowns drove up. Clowns could fit in the little car as there were a bunch of them. And I always have fun at the circus. As my belly was hurt from eating junk food, I thought of buying some popcorn and cotton candy from the lady who was selling snacks. As I always had a good time at the circus, which is always fun.
Okay. So you kind of flip some of those sentences around, especially where a lady
yeah.
was snacks. Yeah. So you kind of, you created a complex compound sentence in that one. So,
Yeah.
okay. Anybody else? How many sentences were you able to get?
This is Vilas. I also got 5 sentences.
You got 5. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. The circus came to town, comma, and tickets were cheap, comma, so I decided to go with my friend. So that's first sentence. The second one, the clowns drove up in a little car, comma, there were a bunch of them, comma, I didn't think they will all fit. There's the second one. Third sentence, I always had fun in the circus. And the first sentence, I bought popcorn and a cotton candy from a lady who was selling snacks, comma, but now my belly hurts because of junk food. And the last sentence, I had a good time, comma, the circus is always fun.
I had a good time, comma, the circus is always fun. Is that what you wrote?
Yeah.
Okay. Ashley, you want to, I'm going to put it in the chat. Do you want to explain what's going on there?
So you have two full sentences. There are two main clauses, right? I had a good time is one. The
Mhm.
circus is always fun. If you separate those by a comma, it has a special name. Anybody remember what that name is? Had to do with my old professor who did a gig for the military. It's a
This is-
comma splice.
Okay.
So
I put it in the chat so everyone can see what a comma splice looks like, Ashley.
thank you. So yes, I see this a lot because this is how we speak. Okay, when we speak, we don't have periods and commas. It's not true that, you know, a short pause when you're speaking is a comma and a long pause is a period. We speak in comma splices. I'm drinking tea, it's chamomile tea. What you need there, sir, I didn't see who was who put that sentence. You can, there are three ways to fix a comma splice. And Teresa has two of them up there. You can put a coordinating conjunction after the comma. I had a good time for the circus is always fun. The second way you can, oh, she put another conjunction because the circus is always fun. She put, excuse me, a piece of punctuation we haven't seen yet. It's called a semicolon. It looks like a comma with a dot over it. You can separate two main clauses with a semicolon, and it's very, very good to get to use. It can vary your sentence structure. It's a good one to know in academic writing. And the third way that you can fix a comma splice is making into two different sentences. But I'm really glad that you brought that up and showed us that, because that is very common. I see it even in professional writing.
And that's, you know, that's one of the things too, I think with grammar is when you start playing around with it, you kind of create all these other things that, you know, one thing leads to another, which I like it. I think it creates a challenge, right? Trying to figure out what is the correct way to do it. And we did not discuss the semicolon, but I do think it's a good thing that it came up today, right? That's something in our 20 most common errors. We would talk a little bit more about that. Okay. So on the next screen, I'll just show you, these are some of the ways that I worked on it and joined it together. Somebody has a question in the chat. The circus came to town and what does the, why does the first sentence is wrong? Okay, let me go
Okay.
back. Go ahead,
Right.
Ashley.
Okay, so Radha, Teresa, could you please go back one more?
The prior,
One more slide. Yeah. Okay, so Radha, when you say why is the first sentence wrong, are you talking about, so the person said, I had a good time, comma, the circus is always fun.
Yes, yeah, that's the one, Ashley.
It's because there is a comma splice. So I just put it back into the chat. So if you have a full sentence, I had a good time. That's a main clause. That's a full simple sentence. Then you have another simple sentence. The circus is always fun. If you separate those two sentences with a comma, it is a comma splice. So in the chat, if you go up right before your question, Radha, Caroline put, I do it all the time, period. This is a good review. So if Caroline had separated these two sentences with a comma instead of a period, it would be a comma splice. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're
I-
welcome.
I always tell students, you can't have two independent clauses attached with a comma. It's not strong enough. Like, think of it that way. It's not strong enough to hold those two sentences together. So you have to give it either a coordinating conjunction, right? Add in a semicolon, or create two separate independent sentences. But the task here was to try and join them together. So that's why you need either a different piece of punctuation, or you need one of those conjunctions to make that compound sentence. So I see them a lot, comma splices a lot. I think it's one of the most common errors, don't you think, Ashley? When
Yes, and I see them from, you know, professionals, my equals, but it's an error, and it does reflect poorly on the person who writes it, to be 100% honest. It's really good to be able to spot it.
that is something that I would, even this combining these sentences and joining sentences together, this is something that I would recommend that students do in the revising part, right? So taking their sentences and revising their essay and pulling sentences together and creating different sentence types, that would be in the revising part. The editing, when you're going through and you're proofreading your papers, that's where you have to look for those comma splices and things like that. So it's always good to have someone else read your paper too, that's, you know, that knows this stuff, to give you, you know, because they can pick up on things that you might miss because you're so used to seeing it. So,
But you don't want to worry about this when you're just trying to fill up that blank white screen, okay? If you're at the beginning of the writing process and you're still trying to get your ideas down, don't worry about it. Put in the comma splices, you know, make mistakes, because a messy first draft is better than trying to get everything perfect. You're not going to get everything perfect. So I'm a big believer in messy first drafts.
yep, just whatever, you just get your thoughts down onto the paper, right? For that brainstorming and drafting stage in the writing process. And then in the revising stage, you can go back and change your sentences. And then even in the editing stage, worry about things like commas and stuff like that. All right, because if you get hung up on these commas when you're trying to draft an essay, you're going to be sitting there like a hamster on a wheel. It's just going to slow you down. Okay, and it creates anxiety for a lot of writers. So that's why I say, don't worry about that while you're, you know, worry about it at that second and third stage of the process. Okay, we have another question. Somebody put another shot in the circus came to town, 7 tickets were cheap. Good. So I decided to go with my friend. Good. Clowns drove up in a little car and there were a bunch of them. So I didn't think they would all fit. I would probably, if we were in a class, I would shorten that a little bit, but it's correct. The lady was selling snacks, so I bought popcorn and cotton candy, even though my belly hurt. I can't move it down.
No, that's a different meaning.
Since I had a good time, especially since I always have fun at the circus. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, you can see, like, I think you got down to what, 5 or 6 sentences there? Which is basically what I got. Again, this is something, it takes practice, and you play around with your sentences. You know, you go in and you start revising and editing when you're writing. And after a while, it just starts to, I don't know, become like a normal part of your writing, I think. Right. So it takes time. All right. So the next part of grammar that we're going to look at, that is a very frequent mistakes in students' writing, and even in my own. There are times I have to go back and check my own capitalization, but it's important. This is a whole nother set of issues, right? So we're moving on from commas, and it's, again, it can create confusion, right? So if I don't capitalize the White House, it could just be any random White House in anyone's neighborhood, right? So if it is a proper noun, like the White House, I need to capitalize that, and it creates a very distinct difference. All right, let's go on. Do you want to go back and forth, Ashley? We'll just kind of tag team these.
Yeah. So the first one is one that my 6-year-old has a lot of trouble with. The first word in a sentence, you have to capitalize.
And then the first word in the salutation and closing of letters and emails. So, dear sir, right? Dear Mrs. Smith. The dear has to be capitalized, okay?
And then the pronoun I. Now, people usually don't capitalize it when they're texting, and that comes into emails and such, but it is correct to capitalize the pronoun I.
Yes. So I do see that in writing too. These habits bleed over. And then again, proper nouns like the White House, and we'll look at these a little bit more closely. So the names of people, places, anything that is a proper noun would be capitalized.
So the next one is the hardest one so far, proper adjectives, and it gives people a lot of trouble, okay? So if you're talking about South America, South America is a proper noun because it is the accurate title of a continent. And so if you want to talk about South American economy, you're going to capitalize South and American, right? It gets a little bit tricky when you're just talking about, for example, directions. So I just said that you capitalize South because you capitalize American, but you're not going to, if I say you need to go south on Main Street, you don't capitalize that because it's a direction. It's not part of the proper noun. Now you would capitalize Main Street. And I feel like I'm confusing everybody.
We'll look at examples after this slide. So we'll break it down and give you some clear examples, right? Okay,
Proper adjectives are difficult. So.
we'll look at them carefully. And then abbreviations, if the words they stand for are capitalized.
So
So-
for example, LU, Lehigh University, capitalize L and U.
New York City, NYC, capitalized, right? Okay.
Names of classes and courses containing a number. Okay, so English 2, capitalize the E for, well, actually that's a bad example because you're always going to capitalize the names of languages. Let's say if you're taking economics 101, you capitalize the E in economics. But if you're just going to say, I'm very interested in economics, you don't capitalize that. Does that make sense?
We'll look at some examples, so we'll see it. And then a person's title, when the title comes before the name. So like President Biden, right? You capitalize the P in president as well as his last name.
Words showing a family relationship, but only when the word is used before or in place of a person's name. So I can say, Dad, are you coming? Or, well, now that's the first sentence in the, so that's another bad example. But if I say, you know, I want to borrow your car, Dad. I capitalize Dad because I'm using it kind of as a proper noun. I'm using it as his name. But if I tell you my dad has a car, you don't capitalize that. That's also one that trips people up.
Yep, and we'll look at some examples. First, and important words in titles and subtitles. So you always capitalize the first word in a title, right? But conjunctions typically are not conjunctions are not capitalized unless it's the first word. So like the Sound of Music, right? So the would be capitalized because it's the first word in the title. And then prepositions of for and under technically do not need to be capitalized. So for instance, I've seen it written different ways. So Gone with the Wind. Technically, you don't need to capitalize with, right? Because it's a preposition and it's a short preposition. So you don't necessarily need to capitalize it. Although again, that gets confusing because you will see it the same way. And we will look at some examples after this slide.
This is a good example of when you need to check your style guide for your field. So they might differ. So longer conjunctions and prepositions like between and beside and among, it could differ on the style that you're supposed to be using. So you thought capitalization was simple, but there's a lot of different things going on. And then the first word inside quotes. So going back to, I think, our very first example, you know, so-and-so said, comma, quotation marks, and then you capitalize it because it's probably the beginning of a sentence.
Okay, so let's look at some of them. So the first word in every sentence. Today is the beginning of a new project, right? Honesty is the best policy, which I notice there's no periods at the end of those sentences. That needs to get fixed, right? So whenever you're starting a new sentence, hey, I will admit it, right? We all do these things. Whenever you're starting a new sentence, you need to capitalize the first word in that sentence. And then
Okay.
capitalize. Want to do that one, Ashley? Go
I
ahead.
don't want to. You can. It doesn't matter.
All right. It doesn't matter. Capitalize a person's title when the title comes before the name, right? So I'm writing my report on President Abraham Lincoln. So his title is president. It comes before a proper name. You need to capitalize it. Do not capitalize. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln was the president of the United States, because we're not using the word president as his title in that sentence. That make sense? Is it confusing? No questions?
Yeah, a quick question here. The Civil War, why is it capitalized?
Because it is the name of a war. It's a proper noun. Okay,
We name our wars.
Mhm. So, yeah, so the Vietnam War, I mean, you would see World War I, World War II, the WW would be capitalized, right?
So there are many different civil wars, right?
Yeah, got it.
Okay.
Thanks.
But in the United States, there's one, right? So our Civil War, right? So if you said the Civil War, we know you're talking about the war between the North and the South in the United States. I see there's a question in the chat. Check it.
Chris is saying that we don't have to use periods because they're bullet points, and
Technically, I know, I know. So, okay, thank you. All right, and then the first and important words in titles and subtitles. But like Ashley pointed out, you really do need to check that. So the glass menagerie, right? So the article the is beginning the sentence, it needs to be capitalized. And then of mice and men. Of is a preposition, but it is starting that title. It needs to be capitalized, but the conjunction and does not need to be capitalized in a title. And then one flew over the cuckoo's nest. The article the does not need to be capitalized.
I think over might be one of them where you would have to check
Yeah.
if you really wanted to get into the nitty gritty.
And
And then abbreviations and initialisms, if the words they stand for are capitalized.
Ashley, I can't remember the name of the book. That little book that we always use for the guy who wrote Charlotte's Web.
E.B. White? Oh,
That little-
Strunk and White. Yeah, Strunk and White style guide. That one?
Yeah, and there's a PDF of that online. I'll put it in the chat for you at the end, but you can easily check some of these things too what's it?
Elements of Style, the Elements of Style.
I couldn't remember the title of the book.
Yeah.
Okay,
Are there any questions about this?
not so far? Okay. I think Ashley, this is what you were talking about when you were saying like proper nouns and, you know, giving locations and things like that, where it does start to get kind of confusing. Do you want to do this one?
Why are you giving me the confusing ones? Okay. So,
You brought it up before.
okay, yes, the proper names of bodies of water and land masses, they need to be capitalized, but not the, okay? So for example, the Statue of Liberty, we capitalize statue, capitalize liberty, but we're not capitalizing those small words. It's almost like the same title capitalization words, right? So, and you see the same rule in the University of Pennsylvania. So we're not capitalizing the or of. So, yeah. Does anyone have questions about this? Does it make sense?
Capitalization can be really confusing. And there are times that I need to go back and check myself. Should this be capitalized? Should that be capitalized? But when it's a proper noun, you have to capitalize like all the main words in there. The articles and things like that may not need to be capitalized unless if they are the first word in your sentence. Okay.
So then these are proper adjectives below. So Spanish food, you're always going to capitalize the names of, languages, for example. So English, it's always going to be capitalized. Shakespearean. So Shakespeare is a person. His name became a noun. So it is, I'm sorry, his name became an adjective. So it is always capitalized. Okay. This is another one that you're going to see a lot in academic writing. African elephant, you're always going to capitalize African because it's the name of a continent. Notice that we're not capitalizing elephant. Okay, and then Southern Florida. It's all, a place name, so we're capitalizing it. Are there any questions? You're going to see a lot of exceptions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can get very complicated. And just, again, I think the one trick to remembering, like with Southern Florida or North America, is that when you're talking about a location, you typically have to capitalize. If you're giving directions, right, then it is not capitalized. All right. That's usually the way to remember it. Okay. And quotations, how to capitalize with quotations. This is another one that can get very tricky. And again, I'm going to give you these slides so you can go back and review these later. And if you do come up with a question, email me. The first word in a quote is a complete sentence is capitalized, but the first word in a partial quote is not. So if you look at number 1, the motorcycle slid sideways and skidded about 100 feet, she said. So you got the comma there to offset the she said, right? I could always flip that too and start with she said, comma, the motorcycle slid sideways and skidded about 100 feet. That the would still need to be capitalized because it's a beginning of a sentence inside the quotes. All right. Now, if you look at sentence number 2, we use the she said as an interrupter in the middle of the sentence. We broke that quote up. The motorcycle slid sideways, she said, and skidded about 100 feet. So I'm not capitalizing that and because it's part of the beginning of the quote. Is even though it's interrupted, it's still one sentence because and skidded 100 feet is not a full sentence. All right. The driver was killed. Again, I tell students, if you do not feel comfortable, you're not certain that your punctuation is correct, getting fancy and splitting up your quotes, don't do it, right? You just have that option. If you're not certain, don't do it. And then the motorcycle slid sideways and skidded about 100 feet, she said. The driver was killed. So the driver was killed in that second quote, even though it's still part of the first, is another sentence. It has to be capitalized. Does that make sense? Everybody good? Okay. And then in number 4, it's the quote is not, it's not a sentence in quotes. We're just kind of capturing a small part of something. He called journalism literature in a hurry. So that's not a full sentence. I don't need to copy to capitalize that. Another small quote, Thomas Mann of the Brookings Institution compares the escalating legal threats to an arms race. So we're just quoting a small piece there. We're not quoting a big chunk. But sometimes when you're taking like a phrase or something, something that, a quip that someone else has said, you want to link it to who said it. Or sometimes it also gives it credibility, right? So for whatever reason, let me just check the chat. Is the quote at the end of the second sentence correct? Let me close chat. Yes. The motorcycle slid sideways and skidded about 100 feet is one sentence. We used she said basically as an appositive, right? So we have to offset it with those commas. And then the driver was killed is another separate sentence. So that's why that the is capitalized. I don't,
Do you have a question about it, Rada?
I think it's just like the there's no like quotation starting on that driver was killed. It's like it started on and it ended in killed. So it could be like
See, there is no quotation before the.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Are you, do you not, you're
no
not?
no no.
The?
I'm skidded about 100 feet. The quotation is not ending and then another one starting, like similar to the third sentence. So that's where
Well, because it's part of the first part of the, yeah. So it looks, it's just that she said is breaking up that one full sentence, right? So if you look at number one, sentence number one, and that's one complete sentence, but in the second one, the she said, the quote is broken up. And, you know, again, you don't have to write that way. So that's something, you know, some people would make, we call them like these kind of rhetorical choices or stylistic choices in their writing. And if that's not something you're comfortable with, just again, don't do it. That, you know, that's the advice I always give students, but it would not be capitalized because it is part of the first sentence. That's the only reason. It's a continuation. It's not a brand new sentence. That's why it's not capitalized. I think Christine, you had a question too about situation.
So you don't have to apologize for using so at the beginning of your question. That's totally normal. That's
It's formal. It's an informal question. We're writing and speaking informally, not academically.
So the answer to your question is usually, but there are going to be rare instances, like if I'm asking a question about a quote, where the quote might end and then I ask a question about it. So for example, Teresa, so you said that I always have to put a comma after an introductory phrase? So the question mark isn't part of the quote of what Teresa said. The question is what I'm saying, okay? So I'm gonna write into the chat, okay?
I get what you're saying.
Okay. So Teresa, and I'm gonna start the sentence with so. So Teresa, you said that we always have to use a comma after an introductory phrase. Okay. So here I put the closing quotes before the question mark, and that's because when Teresa, I don't remember who said it. Maybe she said that, maybe she didn't. But, you know, if she said that, she didn't have it wasn't a question when Teresa said it.
Right, I got you. I think that we talked about that in the citation class.
Good.
Where if it was a question that you were asking about a specific quote, it would be outside. But if the quote was a question
Inside.
inside, then it would be, yeah. So I get it.
So basically, if you're asking a question about a statement, that's a quote on the outside. Yes, good. Yeah, these, again, that's why I enjoy doing this stuff, because I think you have to really, it's challenging. You got to figure it out. All right. So Ashley had said before that this is really confusing too. And I see a lot of mistakes with this. Capitalizing family titles like mom, dad, aunt, grandpa, right? So when you're using the name and you can replace their name, the person's name in there, then you need to capitalize it. If you're using dad or aunt or grandpa or grandma as their name, it would be capitalized, right? But if you're using it in a way that's possessive, then it is not capitalized, right? So can I go to the mall once I finish my homework, mom? Right? So if I was going to ask my mother this, I could say, can I go to the mall when I finish my homework, Joanne? Right? She's going to be angry at me, but I could put her name in there, right? So That's how you have to figure that out. If you could replace the title, right, aunt, grandpa, grandma, with their name, it needs to be capitalized. Do not capitalize it if you're speaking about someone in a possessive way. So Grace asked her mom, right? That's her mother. The mother belongs to Grace. So you do not need to capitalize that. I asked my dad if I could borrow his car. I can't put his name in there. It wouldn't sound right. I wouldn't say, I asked my Robert if I could borrow his car. It wouldn't sound right. So I know that it's a lowercase dad. All right. If I said I asked Robert, then I know that I would have to capitalize the dad. Does that make sense? Okay. These, again, these can get really confusing too, and I know that. When quoting a conversation, think about whether that person is being directly or indirectly addressed, right? So we will always remember Aunt Bessie for her generous nature, Melinda said. So you are speaking about someone that you're using her proper name. So Aunt Bessie, that's her title. I feel for Melinda's loss, said her neighbor. Everyone remembers her aunt's generous nature. So again, possessive, you're using that aunt would be lowercase. Any questions? No? Okay. This does get really confusing. All right. Do you think we have time, Ashley, for a Kahoot or no?
We could either do Kahoots or we could just take questions probably.
Yeah, I think maybe going back and going through some of the questions, if you guys have any questions over any of this, or if you want me to go back to a slide and go over something, we could do that. Anybody have any questions about what we did? No?
Yeah, maybe I have one question. Like
Yeah.
I should remember, it should be Ashley. You said I'm interested in economics. Let's say, for example, I'm interested in economics. Should be the E, like, is it a small or a capital letter for economics?
It would be small. It's like saying I'm interested in science.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. But if you're going to talk about the department, so like if I'm going to say I'm in the economics department, you would actually capitalize economics because it's part of the title of the department. Isn't that confusing? I know that is confusing. Okay. So when people talk about the fields, especially, it does get confusing.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. I don't know if it is related with this topic, but last time I saw like a funny video about like one guy, he asked like a question, like I don't even know the answer. So the question was, like sometimes in the sentence, you don't have to repeat the same word over and over. So you can use some pronouns, or some other
Yeah.
thing just to. So the sentence was, my mom slapped my sister, comma, because she was drunk. So the question was, she, was this the mom or the daughter or like my sister?
There's a word for that. It's a confusing antecedent, right? It's the confusing pronoun. It's ambiguous. You don't know if the mother was drunk or if the daughter was drunk, right? So that is a grammar mistake in English. Yep.
So if you want to correct that sentence, and then if that was a mom who was drunk, how can you say it?
Say my mom slapped my sister because my mom had been drinking all day.
Oh, so you can use like my mom's like another time, like twice in the same sentence.
I would really change the whole sentence if it was important. Oh, the survey isn't updated. Teresa, our survey isn't updated. Is that the
Mary-
wrong?
So,
So
Mary just used that one. She said it was okay. Yeah, I asked her and that was what she said to you. She said use that one.
So Hassan, that's a really good question. If that comes up in academic writing, I would change the whole sentence instead of repeating a phrase twice.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something that we do go over in the 20 most common errors, right? So that workshop is something where we would definitely address that too. So we can, when we're going to do other grammar and punctuation workshops, we'll let you guys know. I will definitely ask them to email you and let you know so we can follow up on more of these things. So,
But that was a great example, because that's the kind of thing where if you're writing it, your brain is going to make total sense to you. You're going to need someone else's eyes to show you, well, this can refer to 2 or 3 different things.
and again, that too is part of that revising and editing, right? Going in and making sure that all of those things make sense. And will your reader know that? Hassan, that's a really good attention to the audience too, picking up on things like that. So I put at the bottom of the slide that we do have another grammar workshop coming up on March 19th. If you're interested, you can register on the iCape workshop page.
Rada, that is great. You know, one time I was teaching a class and I was giving a grammar lecture, and we had 2 minutes left of class, and a student raised his hand and he said, "Dr. Murphy, I have a small question. It's not going to take long. How do you use articles?" So Rada, that's a great question, and we could make a whole nother 75-minute presentation on the usage of articles. And
I would like that if you can for the next one.
Really?
thank you. Okay.
Put that in the survey too. I mean, I'll definitely note that, but definitely put it.
I did, Teresa. Yeah, I did put it on the survey. I finished up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, because it's nice to have some new ideas too, and you know, you guys tell us what you need and what you would like to see, and we're happy to do it, especially if we have, you know, enough people interested. I'm always willing to do it with you as well. So, any other questions? No?
Yeah, I have another question. So, honestly speaking, when I write the academia papers, so my advisor always argued that I may misuse between the comma and the semicolon, between comma and a semicolon. So can you somehow explain what is the general rules? Because when I read the papers, sometimes I do see people use the semicolon, but I'm not sure what is the principle or the rules that to differentiate these two cases.
So a semicolon can take 2 totally independent sentences, 2 perfectly good sentences, and you just link them together with a semicolon. It's a beautiful thing. It's totally simple. But if you do that with a comma, it's an error. It's a comma splice. If you want to take 2 independent sentences and link it, if you want that comma, you need a coordinating conjunction.
Okay.
But I know a really funny cartoon about semicolons, and I'm going to put it into the chat, okay? And so you can, after this is over, you can read up on it a bit more, okay? And here's that URL to the cartoon about semicolons. Any other questions?
That was a lot today. I'm going to stop sharing. I feel like we did a lot in an hour and 15 minutes. So again, let me put the PowerPoint. I will share my PowerPoint with you. Let me go back and get it. And I'll give you the link. And if you have questions when you're going through it, feel free to email me. I would be happy to, you know, email you or even chat with you if you want to Zoom for a few minutes and discuss anything. I'm putting the presentation into the chat right now. If you'd like to go through the slides and just review what we talked about today.
And Dan, our colleagues will talk more about semicolons at the pesky punctuation workshop.
Yeah.
Okay.
That one goes, I've seen the slides for that. There's definitely more punctuation and attention to that type of thing there. Okay. All right. If no one has any other questions, thank you for coming tonight to our workshop. I hope that you thought it was useful. And
Thanks
up.
so much.
yeah,
Thanks so much.
good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
You're welcome.